Now remember, part of the reason we're using pivot tables is because they're a great way to very quickly summarize a larger data set so that we can get a large data set like the census data down to something easier to work with and digestible like our weather data. You may recall that even when we had a summarized and simplified data set like the weather data, one of the first things we wanted to do was we wanted to create a chart to visually represent what was going on across the months with weather. So often what we want to do after creating a pivot table is convert it to a chart, a pivot chart. A pivot chart is simply a chart that is made from the data produced in a pivot table. We're going to do that right now, again, using this very simple analysis, and that way you'll be comfortable as we move into more sophisticated analyses, and we want to create charts from those as well. Just like when we were working with regular tables in Excel, you'll want to click within your pivot table to open up some options. You'll see as soon as we click in there, our pivot table fields menu opens, our little window here on the right, and so we can adjust the analyses we're doing. But you'll notice up in our menus, we get two new menus also. We get Pivot Table Analyze and we get Design. Pivot Table Analyze reproduces a lot of the things we see in the Pivot Tables field window to the right. Far to the right on our ribbon, you can see this field list button. By clicking that, we can make that field list window open and close. So if you ever want to have that list there and it's not available, just go into Pivot Table Analyze and make sure that that is selected so that you can adjust your pivot table as you like. We also have a Design tab, and this lets us change the design of the pivot table itself, just like we did with regular tables a few videos ago. I won't change the color this time, but you can do that. You can add banded rows, you can change the row and column headers, whatever you think works for your particular table or for the problem you're trying to solve. But if we go back into Pivot Table Analyze, we see that there's a button here for Pivot Chart. Because we're already clicked in our pivot table, all we have to do is click into Pivot Chart, and it's going to present us with the chart interface for the data in our pivot table. We don't have to select data. It's already been selected for us. What it's suggesting for us is a bar or column chart, which to me makes a lot of sense for representing the difference in proportion of our data set of males and females. So let's go ahead and select that. And what you see is you see a bar chart that looks a lot like the bar charts we've produced in the past with a few minor changes. We do have some windows here, some buttons that actually would let us manipulate our chart based on our pivot table. There aren't a whole lot of manipulations we can do right now because this is a very simple table, but it's nice knowing that those options are there. Now, it may be that we want to present this chart to somebody else. Maybe we want to include it in a report or a publication, and we don't want those buttons there. We want the finished product there. We can do this as well. If we go to Pivot Chart Analyze, now we're looking at a pivot chart and not our pivot table, and click on that, we can choose to remove those field buttons. We can remove some or all of them, and I'm just going to choose to hide them right now. And what we see is we have a chart just like we've seen before, and we can manipulate this chart just like we've done before. We can add axis titles, we can add other features, we could change all of these, we can change the colors just as we've done in the past. So as you can see, we've got really nice tools working together here. We can quickly summarize our data using a pivot table, and then from that pivot table, we can create a chart that is almost always going to match what we wanted to do because we already set up the data in our pivot table. This is a very nice set of tools that work together really well. I'm going to give you a chance to practice with this now before we move on to some more sophisticated analyses using pivot tables.